Well, a recent report has identified the global defense budget reaching a record high of about 2.4 trillion US dollars, with the biggest spenders, unsurprisingly, being the US and China, numbers 1 and 2. So, Gary, is this surprising?
No, I think this is about right that we're starting to spend more money and increasing on our defense, because especially in the old Europe, because they were always depending on United States to come and rescue them and cover the bill. So I think the increase is about due. Of course, we have wars breaking out all over the place in Middle East and in Europe, a major war going on. We've been ignoring our defenses and upkeeping it for quite a long time, since the Cold War ended.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, many countries, it wasn't just the United States, many countries have changed their perception of how war would be conducted in the future. And there was less emphasis on the traditional military hardware, artillery, tanks and so on, and much more on hybrid warfare. What has the war in Ukraine taught the world with regard to future conflicts?
Well, I think what we've learned is that the war takes its own shape and it changes very, very quickly. It started out in Ukraine that the Russians just lined up in columns and they were going to enter the Ukraine and everything is going to be fine, because Ukraine didn't have much of a military, disarmed itself with our help, of course. And all of a sudden, the people took up arms and started fighting the Russians back, the ones that they kept insisting they're coming to liberate, the Russian speakers and so forth. But they did not want to become part of Russia, and they started fighting them in we can call it partisan war or insurgency war. And the Russians had to pull back their armor and their columns of thousands and thousands of armor and trucks. And then the war took a shape of World War I, where they entrenched themselves and fortified themselves in the trenches so they couldn't attack each other just, with the manpower. And now the war turned out to be in a future war. It progressed itself to a future war where we have drones and we have unmanned vehicles, and whoever has more of unmanned vehicles and whoever has better reconnaissance from the satellite, and it's a massive drone attacks. So those people those sides that have more of a futuristic type of a weaponry, they're the ones that are getting the advantage. And the men from the field are saying they can't really raise their head up, because everything is in drones and everything is in anti-drone technologies. So it is a futuristic war. It's becoming more and more of a futuristic war.
How would you rate the requirement, the necessity of artillery in this war and potentially future wars?
I think that, again, I'm not an artilleryman, although I'm wearing a red shirt, but I'm not an artilleryman. Although I think that armor and artillery is living their last days, because we were actually, for a long time, we were learning to fight the insurgency war or anti-terrorism type of a war, which my career was dedicated to. It wasn't that World War II, World War I type of a combat. But with this war, we see that artillery is playing a major role, and the shells, the amount of shells that they're getting, and the GPSs and anti-artillery technologies play a role. But I think it's outliving itself as well because of a drone, because of the air war, that they can see where artillery pieces are and they're constantly hanging over you, and they can, and now I understand there is artificial intelligence drones, the ones that are just hanging there, and they're the ones without a human assistance can choose and prioritize targets and hit them, which could be a tank that you're showing right now. It could be an artillery piece. It could be a howitzer. It could be armored personnel carrier. Whatever they prioritize, that's what they'll attack from the air. So, and the same thing is happening at sea. We can see that the Russians have a fleet, a famous Black Sea fleet, and Ukrainians are able to sink it with the underwater drones, with other unmanned vehicles that crawl up to them and blow them right out of the water, as you say.
Right, right. Now, the United States spends 37% of the total global spending on arms, and of course, all of that will go to most of it certainly to United States companies, yes, manufacturers, of whom there are relatively few. So the manufacturers are having a bit of a good time, and it reminded me of President Eisenhower's farewell speech in 1961, where he warned against the overwhelming power or influence of the military-industrial complex. Is there a danger of that complex becoming overly influential in America?
Again, that is my personal opinion. It's not my country's state view, but I think it does. And our previous president took them on, trying to take some of that lobbying away from them, just as from pharmaceutical companies and others. But unfortunately, they do play a huge role there. Of course, it's not as simple as a lot of people say, because there are military sales. We sell our weaponry to other countries. That is not just pure business. It's also influence on other countries. For instance, we also incorporate and we integrate with other militaries, like with the Israelis. We have F-35s and F-22s, but they have the helmets for those airplanes. We also have offsets or for that, like in Poland, for instance. I remember when we were working on that deal with F-16, part of some of the parts to be made for F-16s had to be made in Poland, and things like that. So it incorporates other countries, and it plays a political role as well. It's not just pure business. It's also a business of politics. It's not just the money. And of course, those companies play not only what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that those companies not playing only a business role where they, make money making weapons, and then they pay taxes and we all live well and happy. It also plays a political role because they can now play politics because of the weapons that they produce. If they produce less, or if they produce more, or how big of a competition they have, that will play a geopolitical role as well, besides the...
So a complex web of networks and influence, Gary. Thank you very much indeed for coming along and sharing your expertise with our audience. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.